thing. However, this era was at a turning point, and voices were being raised, expressing a new approach towards African wildlife that had nothing to do with the hunter's point of view. They ask that wild animals be considered wonders of creation to be admired, a natural heritage that should be protected at all costs. Vivienne de Watteville returned from her trip in 1935, overwhelmed by her African experience. She wrote the following words in her book, Speak to the Earth. My dream has always been to go into the bush unarmed, without a second thought, to win the friendship of the wild animals. It was a romantic approach that might seem naive if we didn't know about the author's life, if we didn't know about her trophy hunting. Against all advice, Vivienne achieved her dream. She spent 5 months in the wilds of Kenya and met with the animals, this time armed only with a camera. During that time, not far from there, Karen Blixen wrote Out of Africa. Writers, journalists and filmmakers all brought back idealized images of Africa to the salons of Europe and the US. An Africa that was at risk of disappearing forever. They aroused interest and compassion for the endangered wildlife on that continent. In Kenya, a settler named Mervyn Cowie, who was a protector of the environment, pushed the idea of creating parks and reserves like the ones he had visited in the US, Yellowstone and Yosemite. At first, the government was opposed to the idea, and they had a strong argument. The population of Kenya was growing significantly, and they believed that all available land should be used for agriculture. Reserving land for animals meant taking it from people. By pushing, arguing, again and again, the supporters for protected areas ended up convincing others. Their ideas became concrete after the war ended, at the gates of Nairobi. In 1946, the government created a national park on land that had until then been used to store military equipment. The protected area is barely 4 miles from the heart of the city. Its dimensions were modest, around 40 square miles, but contained within it is an astonishing environment and variety of species. The choice of a site at the gates of the capital was a message in itself. It clearly showed a desire to finally protect the wildlife of this country. And it was just the first step. Two years later, the authorities would create a new park between Nairobi and the Indian Ocean. This one is immense. It covers over 7,000 square miles. It's Tsavo, land of red earth. and was known by hunters for its man-eating lions and huge herds of elephants. They also decided to create a reserve at the foot of Kilimanjaro. 30 years later, it would become Amboseli National Park. It's an open space around a large dry lake, which is surrounded by a wetland fed by the waters of Kilimanjaro. The park is small, less than 500 square miles, but the sanctuary contains an incredible number of birds and mammals. This site used to be a favorite of the great white hunters, most notably Ernest Hemingway. Kenya persisted in its policy for conservation. In 1949 and 1950, it successfully created two new national parks, Mount Kenya and Mount Aberdare. Both are mountainous parks. On the plain, a major decision was being made on the other side of the border concerning the savanna wildlife. In 1951, Tanganyika added the wide expanse of the Serengeti to a national park. During the 1960s, when Kenya and Tanganyika achieved independence, there was apprehension about the future of the parks. There was concern that the land dedicated to the animals would be returned to humans. But the opposite happened. It was at that time that the largest number of protected sanctuaries were created in East Africa. The concept of protected areas had made its way just about everywhere in Africa. Finally, at the end of the 1970s, most African countries had formally established protected sanctuaries where by definition the animals were safe. Finally, the future for African wildlife seemed secure. On paper, the plan was to safeguard the species, even increase their numbers. But there was a condition: that the borders of the parks be respected, that the area remain inviolate, and that the rules be enforced. Can this, on a continent that lacks the means, lacks the money, lacks food, really be guaranteed?